Casual sex, it's transactional and it's like prostitution. But instead of paying it with money, in casual sex, you're just paying each other with sex.
Do you want to be the thing in the petri dish that when you stick the pin in it, it goes, ba-doom? That's what sex is when it's just sex.
I go to a party, I want to get some action. I come out of the party with zero action, but the form of beauty. This is a complete bait and switch.
The good life is the life spent looking for the good life.
Right.
Thanks, but no thanks, right?
The best form of romantic relationship is when both parties do not have sex with each other and instead redirect it to philosophical contemplation.
Sex is too powerful to just be a cherry on top. Sex would be a desecration. It would be a violation of the sacred, right? Because if you're going to do the grand thing, you're going to have to get over that.
The philosophical life is the better form of sex.
True love makes philosophers of us all, if only for a while.
Plato's Phaedrus begins by examining what we would today call casual sex. The question is it better to have sex with someone who loves you or someone who doesn't and so won't get attached? Now we might think, look, if it's two consenting adults, there's nothing wrong with sex outside of a relationship. That's the message of hookup culture. This is what sexual liberation has freed us to do. Plato, however, was writing to a liberal culture very similar to our own, and he forcefully rejects it. Casual sex not only hurts our souls, but is structurally analogous to prostitution. And Plato doesn't stop there. Not only does he reject casual sex, he also rejects sex even in a loving relationship. True lovers should abstain from sex. Let me repeat that. Wise couples shouldn't be having sex. Instead, they should redirect their passion for each other towards something much better: philosophy. Philosophy is the better form of sex. My guest today is Berkeley's GRF Ferrari. He is a great Plato scholar and will help us make sense of all this. I know this all sounds pretty crazy now, but if you listen to this interview with an open mind, I think you'll walk away with a profound understanding of what's really at stake in your life when it comes to sex and love. If you want to follow along this episode via transcript, or if you want to be invited to one of my lectures, then please join my email list at jonathanb.com. Without further ado, GRF Ferrari. So in the Phaedrus, we are presented with a question about whether you should accept the sexual advances of someone who loves you passionately or someone who just wants to have sex with you, the non-lover. And this first speech that we are given is by a rhetorician called Lysias. And he actually gives a speech in favor of accepting the advances of the non-lover. So tell us about Lysias' arguments for why.
Basically, it's a very economic argument. It's like, it'll just be a much better deal for you because the trouble with passion is that passion comes and goes. It's very intense and then it burns itself out. So passionate lovers are inherently fickle, says the non-lover. I'll just be your friend. There's this thing that I want from you, and in return, it's going to be a great deal. You've already heard what you're going to get from me. And then just says, what you're not going to get from me is all the bad stuff about lovers. And perhaps I should mention that we're talking here about a relationship, a standard same-sex relationship between Athenian males at this time would involve an older man, a younger, a teenage boy, and the teenage boy is giving the older man sex, not expected to particularly take pleasure in that aspect of it, and the older person is, and the older person is giving the younger one an entree into society, supporting them, becoming a patron of that boy.
So this relationship is, the technical term is pederasty, and it's a common feature of many aristocratic societies, East or West. However, I do think that this dialogue is quite relatable because it made me think of, at least, the current debate over casual sex, friends with benefits versus committed relationships, right? Because there's a similar argument going on today or after the sexual revolution, which is committed relationships, marriage, someone who loves you. That's so much work. What if you could just split out each of the parts of this committed relationship. Okay, so you use Uber Eats instead of someone who cooks for you, right? You use TaskRabbit instead of someone who helps you do your chores. And even sex, you can find someone who doesn't love you, but just wants to have sex with you, right? So this is hopefully a key discussion that our modern audience would relate to as well, because it's fundamentally about can you almost disentangle sex from the love, right?
Yes, that is right. And the way that the first half of the dialogue progresses is to show how much is being missed. It's not that it couldn't work. It could be very efficient.
Right.
But how much is missed if you restrict yourself to this?
Let me give you a quote from your work. One of the functions served by conventional erotic behavior was to mark off sexual relationships between aristocratic peers from those commercially procured from prostitutes. Accordingly, the outrageous twist in the arguments of the non-lover is that by poo-pooing the traditional agonies, he comes close to using the boy as his whore. He is buying sex from him, not with coin, of course, but with the value for money of a trouble-free friendship. Through reason, or at least some reduced version of reason, the friendship, the romance, becomes a relationship of prostitution. And that gave me a lens to view casual sex today, where it's, in some sense, it's transactional and it's like prostitution. But instead of one giving sex and pleasure and the other paying it with money, in casual sex, you're just paying each other with sex. But it still has that kind of rational, transactional nature.
Yes, we've experienced this with hookup culture, which luckily seems to have, well, I don't know, but it did seem to, I certainly noticed a lot of adverse press against it. It seems to have burned itself out, right, thankfully.
Before we get to Socrates' arguments for love, what's interesting is that Socrates is, after Lysias, forced into giving a speech against love. And so they're like, well, Socrates, you give a better speech. So tell us about Socrates' speech against love.
Well, there are two interesting things about it, two big developments. One is it's a bad idea for the boy to bind his destiny to a person that is in passionate love, because it's a desire that will lead the lover to want to completely dominate and entrap the young boy. So it is based on, rather than being based on a completely transactional economic argument, as Lysias's almost economic argument, as Lysias's non-lover's speech was. This starts by describing the difference between reason and desire, giving an analysis of the soul, and disparaging romantic love as, desire overwhelming reason, to cast the relationship in a really bad light. It's a kind of morally improved version of the same argument that you shouldn't go there. Do not engage in a passionate relationship, but instead keep your reason in charge.
Right. So Lysias says, do the friends with benefits. Don't go to the passionate, loving relationship of passionate lovers, because of all these rational, these instrumental benefits you get. Like it's just much less turbulent. But Socrates, what he says is, the lover is going to try to control you. The lover is going to try to reduce down your other social relationships so you have nothing but him. The lover is going to make you stop going to the gym because he's worried if you get too attractive, other people are going to chase after you. Right. The lover is going to stunt your very own development. The lover is essentially trying to clip off your wings. Why is this speech, as you described, more moral?
Because it bases itself on the correct relationship between reason and desire, that reason should be in control of the desires. It just appeals to a moral context, that the desires should be controlled, right? That this is the right thing to do. This is what a gentleman This is what a gentleman would do.
I see. Whereas Lysias is just offering you a pro and con sheet. Lysias is just offering you a balance sheet.
That's how it came across.
If you do these things, you're going to get 10 less dollars. And if you do this, you're going to get 10 more dollars. It's more of an economic argument, right?
That's right.
I see.
And then the second thing, which is Socrates' non-lover, is equally a fictional character that Socrates is speaking in the voice of. And he says of that character that he's actually quite cunning because he's no less passionately in love. This boy is an incredible beauty, and he has lots of lovers, lots of suitors, all head over heels for him. And Socrates' so-called non-lover is in fact secretly as much in love with the boy as anyone else is. And that seems associated with the fact that whereas Lysias' speech was quite prosaic, almost like a catalogue, as you rightly just conveyed, the Socrates' speech, he stops like a third of the way through to say, wow, I'm really getting quite high-flown here. And I think that we've noticed that this nice place in the countryside where we've sat down to talk, it seems to be sacred to the nymphs. It's a numinous place. And maybe the nymphs are taking me over or something. I seem to be... and then at the end, Socrates breaks off the speech saying, that's enough. I've started talking poetry now, because the last sentence is almost like falls into metrical poetry. So this prepares us for the great speech in favor of love that is coming up, where it's almost as if the fact that the non-lover was really in love breaks through in the way that Socrates actually delivers this, in the way that Socrates starts to feel unhappy about the speech that he's been compelled by emulation of Lysias to produce at this point.
So to summarize what you're saying, there is a parallel between this non-lover, hypothetical non-lover, the friends with benefits person that Socrates is fictionalizing, and Socrates himself giving the speech. Whereas the non-lover is suppressing his real desires for the boy. Socrates is suppressing his real desires for love, in the sense that Socrates actually is in favor of the loving relationship and against the friends with benefits casual relationship, but he's just been compelled in this little rhetorical challenge to give this argument.
Yes, that's right.
So why does the suitor try to hide the fact that he is in love with the boy in Socrates' fiction?
Well, he wants to stand out, doesn't he? And wooing does involve arguments, it does involve persuading the person being wooed that it would be beneficial to.
I see. Here's the intuition.
I'll treat you well.
For this person that I want to court, they are so beautiful and attractive that there are suitors falling head over heels over them already, writing the best love poems. And my only hope of standing out is to pretend that I actually don't really love them. I just want to have sex with them. I think you're okay,
Right.
And then I'm going to give you this speech. That's the idea. So those are the first two speeches against love.
Yes.
And the argument is you should go for a friends with benefit, because a loving relationship has all this turbulence. It has all this economic loss because of that turbulence. And Socrates says, furthermore, the lover will try to control you, will try to make you his possession. Socrates, as you say, eventually can't help himself anymore and is compelled to give a speech in favor of love, which is his actual position. But before he does, he brings up two very interesting devices that I want to talk about. The first device is madness, divine madness. Tell us about this concept.
So the non-lovers had touted their sobriety, and it was a bad thing in romantic love that lovers kind of acted all crazy for a while, head over heels, and then we're done with it and went back to ordinary life. And they said, we'll be sober, we will be stable. Rationality is a good thing because you're in control, and we can both enjoy the benefits that we can give each other and so on. The opposite to rational sobriety, madness, was completely a bad thing in those speeches. It was just black and white, good versus bad. And now Socrates comes up with the idea that, well, there's actually a division of good and bad within madness itself. And what we have been forgetting here is that there are several kinds of beneficial madness in our culture. He mentions things like prophecy, for example, of an inspired prophet, such as with the Delphic oracle, going into a kind of a trance and benefiting the world thereby. And among them is erotic love. Among them is erotic love. It is a beneficial kind of madness.
I quote you your book. Madness can achieve beneficial results that would be beyond the reach of sobriety. In particular, he will contend that a philosophic life can best bloom when rooted in what he calls the divine madness of love, as opposed to a merely mortal self-control. For example, the poetic madness of those who are seized by the muses and truly inspired to glorify the deeds of past heroes are contrasted with the uninspired hack who thinks technique alone will make a poet of him. So many interesting things here in this quote, but I'll just highlight two of the most pressing ones. The first one is, why does philosophy also require madness?
It's a relationship between love madness and philosophy that the speech brings out, not madness in general. A philosopher is a very peculiar kind of person. A philosopher does not follow social rules in the same way that we have this feeling about the same kind of romantic sort of conception of artists. Artists are cut a lot of moral slack in our world, even if they're behaving crazily, behaving badly and so on, breaking rules. They're allowed to for the sake of their art. There's something of that in philosophic madness. True love makes philosophers of us all, if only for a while. In what sense does it make philosophers of us all? In that we behave in an otherworldly fashion. We neglect our affairs. We stop checking the credit card bills, buy another gift for our beloved. In Greek culture, lovers would do crazy things like camping out in front of the beloved's door overnight. You will forgive a lover for this, but these would be behaviors that would be you're not behaving in a sober, socially appropriate fashion.
And the philosopher requires the same kind of love or madness for truth, is the comparison.
With the philosopher, of course, it goes much deeper than that. So there is a kind of a superficial resemblance between the behavior of a true lover, in the sense that a truly romantically passionate lover, and Socrates went around not wearing never wore sandals. His clothes were dirty. Didn't take care of his affairs. That's superficial. Of course, the true otherworldliness that Socrates is feeling is the connection with that there is more to life, there's more to love than sex. And in true love, the way Plato tells this myth that Socrates gives in his second speech, has the knockout blow of falling in love with someone that you find absolutely beautiful. Somehow, it doesn't just take you out of yourself, but it gives you some intimation that of a meaning, a meaningfulness that goes beyond both you and that beloved boy. So how can this happen? How can this beauty seems otherworldly, exactly, bigger than both of us.
I see. In our other interview on the Republic, we talked about the structure of Plato's soul, right? The reasoning part, which desires wisdom and truth, the spirited part, the social part, that desires honor and glory and social drives, and the appetitive part, right? Sex, food, shelter, what we share with animals. Madness cannot be either spirit or desire taking control of the psyche. Divine madness, at least, right?
Right.
Because reason is still in control, even in madness. Is that right? In divine madness, and I think this is what is so interesting about Plato's characterization of divine madness, is that in divine madness, reason, the highest parts of our soul, is still in control, right?
Yes.
And so in what sense is it madness? Is he just trying to say a very strong impulse?
The way he puts it mythically is that a memory is stirred in reason of beauty itself, of which the soul had a disembodied vision.
I see.
Now, how can we cash that out? in a less mythical way. I say it relates to, and I'm not alone in saying this, a sense of the sacred, the tripartite soul. And he compares it to a charioteer and two horses. The charioteer and two horses. The charioteer driving the chariot. The horses there's a white horse that represents the love of honor. There's the black horse, it represents spirit. The black horse represents appetite, and including our sexual appetite in particular. And the charioteer is reason. And as he gets close to the boy, the black horse starts pulling in the traces. I want to get me some of this, in the crudest way possible. And reason, in concert with the white horse, pulls pulls the black horse back.
It's not just reason that's pulling. The white horse is helping.
The white horse is helping because the white horse is saying, no, this is shameful. You don't throw yourself on the boy.
Right.
You offer him a cockerel.
Right. The white horse is honor. The white horse is concern for society, right? And Plato is saying...
Yes, what would people think?
Right, exactly. But Plato is saying that reason can turn the white horse, can turn this desire for honor, which in modernity people think to be a bad drive, but can turn it to steer the even worse horse in a better direction, right?
And it doesn't work. And it doesn't work in that when it was just argued in terms of, look, a gentleman doesn't do this when courting a boy. There are some rules of courtship, and we need to engage in all those white horsey kind of arguments. They succeed in pulling it back for a bit, but then they once again the black horse cannot be kept down. You can't keep a good black horse down.
Right.
And only until the reason gets close enough, the charioteer gets close enough to see the flashing eye of the boy, as it's put, and suddenly a memory, the full force, is stirred with full force of his disembodied, otherworldly vision of beauty itself, which is a divine thing, divine beauty, a beauty that is much larger than any human beauty, of which he somehow, because you can be so overwhelmed by the beauty in other people when you're falling in love, because it sort of takes you over, sweeps you up so much. The charioteer then sort of is described as falling back on the reins. He doesn't consciously pull back on the reins, it seems like, the way it's described. He's just, oh my God, he falls, and the reins go with him, and he pulls back. The white horse, as well as the black horse, get pulled to the ground in a very
sudden, right?
Very sudden, cruel. The bit must be really, he bloodies their mouths with the bit. He's not thinking. If he was thinking, he wouldn't do it to the white horse as well as the black.
Hence why he's mad. Hence why reason is mad in this instance, right?
Mad in the sense that...
overtaken, just completely overtaken, right?
The reason before... when he was sort of with the black horse, allied with the white horse and negotiating with the black horse. I didn't say that before, but there's a long negotiation. They talk back and forth, the black horse and the charioteer.
Right.
Because these are talking horses like in Homer, Negotiation doesn't work. He's trying to talk his lust
Pure
down.
reason doesn't work, right?
But when you fall back and you see this divine vision, what is motivating him not to assault the boy in any kind of crude way is he senses that would be a desecration. It would be a violation of the sacred. That is the true motivator. And the white horse has nothing to do with that. The white horse in the myth has not seen that place where the beauty itself is. Only the charioteer gets to poke his head above the heavens and see that.
So let me try to cash all of this out in language that our modern audience can relate to. The black horse, that's sexual appetite. Right?
Yes.
Charioteer is reason, that's our rational abilities and control. The white horse is honor, desire for what society cares about us. So go back to the first piece, Lysias's speech. Lysias's non-lover is just the black horse. Like he's just giving an economic shopping list of what your lowly appetites can expect. Come with me, I'll give you a better stipend every month because I'm more dependable.
Right.
Socrates' non-lover is almost like this, using the white horse against the black horse. Mm-hmm. He is honor-seeking, and that can only work so far. That can only put down a sexual appetite so much.
He's talking in terms of respectability.
Right, exactly.
That's a social sense.
Yeah. Whereas it sounds like the only good solution here was when reason itself is so overcome by some higher goal that reason has the power to overpower the horses, or reason, explain to me how that works. When reason sees beauty, the beauty in itself, the sacred, the full thing, does reason become so powerful that it can now hold back the two horses, or do the horses commune with the beautiful as well?
No, the horses do not commune with the beautiful, and they are forced down. There is a kind, that's what makes it akin to madness. It is, reason in the analogy is using force on the horses. He's not persuaded. When he tried to persuade the black horse and negotiate with him, he failed. Because this is what makes love useful as a starting point for a philosophic life, romantic love, because it is beyond negotiation. It is a non-negotiable. That's how the philosopher's reason will feel about all of we feel about the good as well as the beautiful. These are what give life meaning. That's what a philosopher who's lived a full philosophic life. There are things that are meaningful and everything else is secondary. Now, there are many ways to be a true lover. But among those true lovers are philosophers, and they're the ones that can then use that initial falling in love that they experienced to live out a philosophic life in partnership with the person who inspired it. Because at that point of falling in love, this other the boy's beauty was all that was meaningful, was all that mattered. It was like it gave meaning to his life at that point, and he just wanted to devote himself to the boy. And that feeling is one that you want to then channel into, and the otherworldliness that attended it is what you then want to channel into an entire life. Right,
I see. So we've talked about the two devices that Socrates uses in his speech for love. One device is divine madness, and here he's trying to preempt the intuition that all madness is bad. Then he brings in this metaphor of the charioteer and the two horses. Let me try to reconstruct his positive answer for why love is so important, and you can tell me if I got it right or wrong. You should go with someone who loves you, but truly loves you, not in a debauched or merely sexual way, because that is a much higher sphere of existence, in the sense that the true philosophical lover would primarily see your beauty and want to improve that. And so they're not here to, like Lysias's non-lover, negotiate some kind of economic contract with you. They're here to try to improve your souls. So again, to come back into contemporary terms, a committed loving relationship is one where you want the other person to be good. Is that roughly it?
Well, yes. So definitely he says that people are looking for characters that they feel a kinship with, the older person feels he can improve the boy. But because we really are talking about falling in love, in the same way that, we can also identify with this, it's probably not a good idea to marry someone or to have a committed relationship with someone simply because you think they're a good person or you recognize the goodness in their character. There needs to be a physical attraction. Right. And that will change if you carry on through life with that person, but you can always refer back to and take strength from how you felt back in the day when you were at your most romantic together. And that's why that's why there is this physical component of physical beauty mixed with the characterological component, because because physical beauty can transform the mere animals that we are into something divine.
So,
as Plato puts it.
Let me try to describe the phenomenology, what the true lover experiences when he sees this beautiful boy, which is he sees the beauty, completely overwhelmed by it. The sexual urge doesn't disappear, but he channels that drive into a committed and loving relationship in helping the boy become better himself. Is that roughly right?
Yes. Not that the energy of the black horse is somehow directly. It's not like a Freudian.
Right.
But yes.
I see. Importantly, Socrates says the true lover doesn't actually have sex with the boy, right? Why is that? Why can't it be a committed?
But then they don't live the philosophic life.
Right, but why can't there be a committed relationship between two lovers who both want to improve each other and have sex?
Because the sacred part wasn't the sex.
Right. But why does sex prevent the sacred part from coming out, right? Like, because surely, like, in a committed relationship, you would say the best part of our relationship is the actual relationship we have and not the sex itself. But sex can be a nice cherry on top, right? Like why is sex almost prohibited in this relationship?
Well, because sex is too powerful to just be a cherry on top. When I'm teaching this in class, I would go to the blackboard and draw little stick drawings with these two stick men are looking adoringly into each other's eyes and contrasting it with two stick men that are holding hands but facing out from the blackboard and just facing out to the world, or in the case of philosophic lovers, facing out to the realm of the forms. But what's important is the philosophic life that you are living for yourself and happy to share with this other person for the sake of your former love, but you don't want, like the people that they drink a little bit too much at a symposium, then they have sex with each other, and once they've done that, they're going to keep on indulging it from time to time, he says, and the souls will get their wings for the sake of each other when they do get their wings. The philosophic lovers get over. That falling in love is something that actually seems to be, if you're going to do the grand thing,
if
you're going to
the highest,
the grand thing, you're going to have to get over that.
I see. So the intuition is there are certain pleasures that are just too strong merely to be a cherry on top. And again, a good example here is like heroin. No one would think like, oh yeah, heroin is a pleasure. I'll just do it once in a while and my life will just be exactly the same, ceteris paribus, right outside of that.
Remember, as you said, friends with privileges.
Right.
It's too strong to be a privilege.
I see.
Cherry on top is like a privilege.
Right. Friends with benefits. It's too strong to be
benefits, sorry.
However, there are other pleasures.
I need to correct my dating jargon.
Yes. There are other pleasures, like eating a cheesecake. And no one thinks eating a cheesecake with their significant other is going to ruin the relationship, because the relationship won't be able to focus on anything but cheesecake eating.
Yeah.
And so he's simply making a judgment that sex is something that is more like heroin than it is cheesecake eating. That once you indulge a little bit, that's what the entirety of the relationship is going to be like. That's kind of the intuition. Is that right?
Yeah.
So is he making the strong claim that in any committed relationship, and let's project this back to our modern times of a heterosexual or homosexual marriage, in such a relationship, is the advice that to not have sex, even if you really love each other, so that you can both be oriented towards a higher good?
Well, in the Republic, as you know, he has the class from which philosophers come. They have sex in mating festivals for the sake of the city,
Right. But only procreative, only for procreation.
Yeah, it gets now. Here, that's because he's being very political in the Republic. Here, he is giving romantic love its due by saying, romantic love, true love, makes philosophers of us all for a while. But we shouldn't pretend that it could make actual philosophers of us. It can give us an entree into the philosophic life, and we can cling to how that feeling was as a sort of, we want to extend that. If only, he says, beauty shines brighter than any of the other forms. If only, the form of justice shone as brightly as that. Imagine how we might live in that inspired way. You want to get inspired by all of existence in the way that the true lover is inspired by his beloved. And then you're living the full philosophic life.
So this is how far the critique of friends with benefits or casual sex goes. The best type of romantic relationship not only is not just friends with benefits, just an exchange of sex. It's not even a committed relationship with sex. The best form of romantic relationship is when both parties do not have sex with each other and instead use that brief period of romantic divine menace flash to redirect it to philosophical contemplation. Is that the claim?
Apparently.
I see. What this reminds me of is, I believe it's Nietzsche's critique of another dialogue called the Symposium. And so the Symposium, for our audience, there's a dinner party, they talk about love, and it's kind of a similar strategy that Socrates employs, where you start off with loving a single body, and then you climb this ladder, and you end up loving philosophy, essentially, right? The form of beauty itself. And I think Nietzsche's critique goes something like, I go to a party, I want to get some action. I come out of the party with zero action, but the form of beauty. This is a complete bait and switch. Like, convince an Alcibiades, convince a Don Juan, convince a womanizer, convince a seductress that contemplating the form of beauty is not just better than sex, but even the same kind of thing as sex.
Well, Socrates did convince Alcibiades, didn't he? In the very Symposium, where Alcibiades himself tells us, in the sense that he tried his best to seduce him, and when Socrates treated him just like a brother, even though he slept under the same sheet, the same cloak, one night there, it made Alcibiades want to come back for more. So Alcibiades could see the point of this, even though he didn't have the strength, he didn't have the spiritual strength to persist in that himself, but he could certainly see what Socrates was about. I mean, bait and switch, what you're switching for, of course, is you don't come out of one party saying, I didn't, not only did I not see any action, I got this lousy lecture on the form of beauty. No, what you get it switched for is an entire life slowly building up to an experience of, if possible, this transcendent experience at the end.
Let me try to reframe this critique in the following way, which is the reason that the philosophical life is the better form of sex for Plato has to do with his idea of the forms, right? These metaphysical entities, because the form of beauty, which is one thing that the philosophical life aims at, instantiates in a beautiful person, right? So the idea is that sex with a beautiful person is a lesser form of contemplating the form of beauty because it's merely grasping the particular and not the universal. The problem is, in modernity, where we have rejected the forms, sexual desire is just an evolutionary impulse that's not connected in this laddering way to contemplating the form of beauty. And so in this world, is there still a way to run Socrates' arguments?
If you understand the forms in a fairly minimalist way, such that a person who lives their life by looking to the forms is acting or thinking according to what the situation itself demands, as opposed to what society tells him he should do, what other people seem to need or want, and catering to those needs or wants, or what he himself happens to need or want. It's getting away from living the world according to what just happens to be the case, a sense of that the world around us it just happens to be the way it is, that we evolve, we happen to evolve as these creatures and so on. And instead, getting away from that because such a life would have no meaning. You're looking for things that can have true meaning. And if we think of the forms as a realm of true meaningfulness rather than conceding to coping with what happens to be the case, there's a way that life should be lived, as opposed to, I want to get by in life or get on in life.
I see.
I think those are very, normally you hear that when someone's preaching to you from a pulpit on a Sunday or in whatever other religious, so one can relate it to modern life by, are you a religious person or not? Religious people think this way.
I see.
Even if we don't accept Plato's forms anymore. I don't think you have to accept it in all its details to make it relevant.
So the intuition is contemplation, philosophy as a life is a better form of sex because it's a more pure and sustainable form of wanting to live well and being pulled by the good and the beautiful. Something like that.
The black horse just happens to experience lust when the right stimulus comes along. I mean, do you want to be the thing in the petri dish that when you stick the pin in it, it goes,
Right.
you know?
Right.
That's what sex is when it's just sex. What your mother will tell you is that sex, when combined with love, is a beautiful thing. And
Right.
this is as far as Plato gets in his dialogues, describing sex as a beautiful thing. The whole person, with all those three parts of his souls, is sexually aroused by the boy, but overwhelmed above all by the boy's beauty. And, so you think he could see a way to including, as you said, why can't they just include sex? Plato just seems very much too,
Dangerous.
Seems very worried about
Dangerous, I see. Here's the next plot twist. I quote to your book. Socrates portrays the life of philosophic lovers as the fullest realization of the philosophic life in general. Thus, we recall that he described the highest of the 9 ranks of life as that of one who has practiced philosophy without guile or combined his love for a boy with the practice of philosophy. What's crazy here is not only is philosophical lovers, which again is this relationship where there's romantic love, there's sexual passion, but neither party indulge. Instead, they orient themselves together to the joint pursuit of philosophical goodness. That is not just the best form of sex. That is the best form of philosophy. Why is that?
Well, now, here, Jonathan, I'm going to, as I warned, remind you that I wrote this book 40 years ago that you're quoting from. And that is not something I would say today.
Okay, fantastic. Well, tell us about why you said it before and what changed.
I said it before because I fell in love with the Phaedrus when I was, a graduate student, and I fell in love with Socrates' speech and being overwhelmed by its beauty. I also wanted it to be the fullest realizer, and I was a much younger man. So I did not acknowledge in that quote, it's because he's a philosopher that he's living the best kind of life.
Right.
Not because he's erotic. Why? Because, why do I say that? Because, and this I do acknowledge in the book, it's blessed good fortune if you happen to fall in love as a philosopher with another philosopher.
I see.
And there are philosophers who do not have that good fortune. Right. It's a contingency. You can be lucky that way. And you're not lucky because it means that you will realize the philosophic life in the fullest sense. You can do that. It's like what we were discussing about the Republic. If a philosopher gets to be the ruler in Callipolis, the ruler in the ideal society that is ruled by philosophers, he'll become a greater person, not a better philosopher, but a sort of fuller person. Right. It's a lovely aspect to have added to your philosophic life, and it's something that you can feed off that energy for the rest of your partnership.
So why are you hesitant to making the next step in the argument and say that, it's still better to be a philosophical lover than a mere philosopher, even if it's only minute, and even most of the goodness comes from the philosophy?
Well, I'm just distinguishing between it is better as a human life,
right?
Fuller. You're missing out on something if you didn't have the good fortune to do that. But it is not a fuller realization of the philosophic life.
I see.
TPL, that is its own thing.
I see.
And not because love is the love is a kind of sex. He's not going to take allow as a cherry on the cake, but this is a kind of cherry on the cake.
Right, I see. So the part that you want to retract from this book you wrote 40 years ago is that the philosophical lover is a better philosopher in some sense than the lonely philosopher. He's not, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't live a better, more full human life. He does, right? That's the distinction.
Yes, okay. That's what I'm saying.
You mentioned that beauty, even though there are so many good things that Socrates and Plato says about it, has a dimension that creates fear, tension, of pain. Tell us about that side of beauty.
Well, in the sense that awe is related to fear. The awe that Moses feels before the burning bush, when God talks to you in the Bible, you're often struck by awe. That is a kind of fear, the awe that Job feels. It's awe is related to fear, but it is a good thing in the sense that it brings us to terms with our humanity and makes us feel small. It has a negative side to it, but it's a great thing that we were given that opportunity to be humbled before it. It's certainly a very disturbing experience that the charioteer has when he's falling back and kind of losing control of his chariot there, right? You know, just falling back with the reins and dragging the horses to the...
The danger is not just if the black horse, if appetite indulges, he will lose control. But there's something more than that, right? It's not just the instrumental economic danger of losing control and spiraling out of control. It's something about the majesty or power itself of beauty that makes it fearful or awesome, independently of the dangers it has. Is that a right way to understand it?
Yes,
it's not just a prudential fear. It's not just, right.
Yes, because you as a philosopher are brought face to face with what you'd like to understand and face to face with your limits, because you're never going to fully, that is beyond you. You're not a god, but it is where you want to be.
Right.
And so it's not that you sense failure, but you are filled with an ambition that you, as Socrates, like Socrates, he knows his own ignorance. It doesn't stop him. It doesn't stop him living a life of examination, examining himself and others.
And even though Plato, as you described, is not an ascetic, on the topic of sex, he does seem pretty puritanical, because if I remember correctly, in the laws, it's really only procreative sex that he really legitimates, right? And so on the topic of sex, maybe the idea is that it's just such a powerful drive. Just don't do it unless it is necessary.
Yes, the sense in which that's right. Puritanical, sure, austere, puritanical. Insofar as I associate the word puritanical with close to asceticism, what makes asceticism is you want to punish the body.
Masochistic in some sense.
Yes, there's no punishing of the body for the sake of punishing the body, because, body, bad body.
Right, I see.
You want to get away from it, because that makes you a slave to the body in a different way.
I see.
Paying too much attention to it.
Now, if the Phaedrus had just ended there, it would already be one of the most head-scratching dialogues of Plato. But then it takes another shocking twist and becomes a discussion about rhetoric, writing, and philosophy. We're going to spend the rest of this interview talking about his critique of rhetoric, his critique of writing, but how are these two halves related? Why did Plato join a discussion about love and a discussion of rhetoric together?
Yeah, well, that requires a little bit of literary and cultural history to explain, because it does take a turn, but remember, it started with rhetoric.
Right. These are speeches that are being given, Lysias' speech, Socrates' speech, right?
Absolutely, and Phaedrus is taking part in rhetorical culture where speech writers advertise their wares by writing and delivering speeches on unlikely topics and praising unlikely things, so showing how clever I am. I can even make you think that a non-lover is the way to go it's so unconventional, but if I can argue that way, think about how good I'll be in a courtroom when I'm trying to defend you.
You want to hire me, that's right.
You're going to want to hire me. And Phaedrus is trying to learn by heart this speech. That's why there's a script there that Phaedrus gets to read out. That's how Lysias' speech is delivered within the dialogue. Lysias isn't himself a character in that dialogue. So the whole context is rhetorical, and Phaedrus wants Socrates to admire what a good writer, what a good rhetorician Lysias is. And then we just return to it kind of as planned. So it is not it is a turn, absolutely, in terms of the book,
right,
because we've been, in terms of its content, we've been swept away by this magnificent poetic speech that takes us into the Empyrean, and then suddenly we're down in the weeds of figuring out writerly technique and so on. That, by the way, is another reason not to think of love as a crucial component of the fullest philosophic life, because here, a bit of cultural context. Love was a common, one of the common topics that was taken for unlikely praise. Normally, when rhetoricians praise something unlikely, it's mentioned at the beginning of the symposium as well. Rhetoricians spend their time praising salt or that sort of thing,
Right.
but doing so beautifully, right? Just to show how well they can write. But why don't we instead praise something worth praising, like love? That's how the symposium begins. Plato's doing the same thing here, because he's praising something unlikely, like madness. You know, you're telling me that the reason should be mad? How unlikely is that? But normally, the people that write these kinds of things it's a jeu d'esprit, you know, tongue in cheek somewhat. You don't really think salt is so great.
Right.
You think you're so great.
Right.
Because look how well you can write about this thing that isn't so great. It's useful, you know, but, and same with non-love. But when Socrates gets honest and says, you know, I'm not praising that horrible commercial non-lover anymore. I'm praising the lover, the mad lover. He's praising something really unlikely. Plato is, in writing this, is doing this standard rhetorical thing where you praise something unlikely to show how well you can write. Mm-hmm. And Plato too is praising something very unlikely to show how well he can write, and what a better writer than my other rivals. Look at this magnificent poetic speech that's going to blow everyone away. But he's doing it honestly because he really does believe that this divine madness, this is the twist, right? It is something very unlikely, but a philosopher is very unlikely. A philosophic life is a very unlikely kind of life, as it were. You don't expect human beings to live like this. That's why they're regarded as weird. And I'm going to make you want to be that thing.
The difference between Plato and the other orators are that the other orators, they just use the form without the right content. They're out there to convince anything about anything. My favorite is the encomium on Helen. If I can defend Helen of Troy,
which Socrates did,
who destroyed like entire cities and launched 1,000 ships, I can defend certainly you in court.
Right.
But Plato masters the rhetorician's skills, but also uses that to share good stuff.
Goes beyond.
And not just arbitrariness.
They're professionals, he's a poet.
Right.
He's inspired.
I see. So Plato says that what bakery, creating pastries, is to the body, rhetoric is to the soul. So rhetoric is definitively not medicine, something that improves your body, but it's bakery, giving you nice pastries even if they hurt your body. Now, one should be forgiven for just thinking, oh, Plato hates rhetoric. But that's not true at all.
No.
Right? One of the key thrusts of the Phaedrus is that rhetoric is essential in some sense for the philosophical life. Is that right?
If you're going to propagate the philosophical life.
Right. I see.
If you're Diogenes in his barrel, if you are really, you could live as a philosophic hermit.
Right. A solipsistic kind of existence. But if you're going to be in any type of philosophical community, then rhetoric becomes necessary.
Yes, and also philosophic community that has to exist in the real world. Yes, right. You want to, yes.
So rhetoric is not to be brushed away. It's to be learned, but you just can't let its ends take you astray, right?
Right, and you certainly don't want it to be, and you don't become a slave to the customer, right? Which is like the pastry chef is.
And this, I think, is the most fascinating part of the Phaedrus, which is Plato's critique of writing. Uh-huh. Plato says that, I'm gonna be a TLDR here, writing books is bad. Because that is just philosophy. It's just content, even if it's right. He calls it something dead and not alive. So that is what philosophy degenerates to without rhetoric. It becomes this dead thing that can't move anyone. Is that right?
Well, the irony clearly is that, it concludes with a discussion of the value of writing, and Socrates tells a story, a myth, in which the inventor of writing in Egypt goes to the king of the Egyptian gods and says, oh, how useful writing is going to be. It's going to help people remember things. The king of the gods says, no, it's a remedy. It can serve to remind you, but it'll be bad for the memory. People won't have their memory well up from inside them, and they will use it as a crutch. And then Socrates extends that into saying, Yes, when things are written down, you want to have a discussion with it. It's almost as if the book could talk to you, but if you ask it questions, it's going to stay forever silent and say the same thing over and over again. And how much better, says Socrates, who of course himself never wrote anything, the living discourse between, living human beings that are discussing philosophy with each other, where you can sow a seed. And here is where rhetoric can help if you're putting it across well and so on, where you can sow a seed in another soul that can then grow and spread. So that's where, as you say, the written text always says the same thing over and over again. It seems dead. That's why you were saying that the thing seems dead. And Plato is writing all of this.
Right. Before we talk about that, let me just try to make this again more relatable to our modern audience. The rhetorician, the orator, in the bad sense, is the modern influencer, right? Uh-huh. The modern influencer, yes. Right? Someone who just, you want to sell, whether it's erectile dysfunction pills or some multi-level marketing scheme, I'll help you sell it. I'll push it to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
That is form without content.
Mm-hmm.
However, maybe this will hit a bit too close to home. Perhaps the modern academic is the book writer. I'm going to publish this book for tenure, even though no one else is going to read it. But often, and my experience of learning philosophy in the academy has been, it's often this kind of dead knowledge. Like people are here to solve these academic puzzles, but this idea of a philosophy as a way of life is almost laughed out of the academy these days. Is that a right modern comparison of these two failure modes of philosophy?
Yes, I mean, in the sense that, Plato is competing with Socrates in this dialogue. He's competing with an academic colleague. They both founded academies and tried to entice. Anyway, they did have students attending these things. They weren't university professors, but it's from what they got started that the universities have developed. So Plato was not foreign to that kind of rivalry, but on the other hand, he seems to have your concern, Jonathan, and that there needs to be something more than that. Yes, I want to put Socrates down because I think I'm offering something more genuine and better than he does. But I don't want to get caught up in merely academic rivalry. There's bigger fish to fry. The philosophic life does mean something, and which we try to find for ourselves in our teaching. We don't just write books. We are teachers, and that is a practice. Right. That is more like a way of life.
Sowing the seed into the lives of souls. Right. And so obviously the question is, if Plato really believes this, why doesn't he spend the rest of his life going around Athens like Socrates, trying to sow the seed in the living souls, and instead dedicates most of his time, it seems, to writing these books?
We don't know how much of his time he dedicated. There seems like almost a self-referential description in the Phaedrus itself, where Socrates is made to talk of the guy who doesn't go to drinking parties, but instead burns the midnight oil in his study, and he's writing away. So you can imagine Plato who conducted business, taught and traveled and whatever during the day, and the laws is full of don't sleep too much, So let's imagine one of those guys that slept 3 hours, wrote his books at night.
But the question still stands. The question stands. Yes.
Yeah. The question still stands. Well, and he didn't even get that thing started. Other followers of Socrates started writing Socratic dialogues before Plato did. And one of the reasons is, would we be talking about Socrates today if he hadn't?
Right.
He obviously thought, from the mere fact that he has written this thing, we know that he thought it was worthwhile to do this other way of spreading the word, sowing the seed. He wrote it in a literary way. He wrote fictions. He concealed himself behind characters. The great thing about fiction is that we can learn from it without being told. We can learn by interpreting the fiction, as opposed to being straight out lectured at by a professor. So I think it's very significant the form in which he chose to write, given that he did make the decision that it was worthwhile to immortalize Socrates and the philosophic life in this way.
Although in this analysis, it almost seems like the relationship between living and dead are exactly flipped. Socrates' students have died more than 2,000 years ago, but his ideas still live on through books, right? And so there's an irony where reading Plato's book kind of nullifies his idea and flips it on its very head. That the book is the thing which keeps the idea alive.
Only if it inspires us to do more than just write books. That's assuming that Plato is agreeing with what he puts in the mouth of his character, Socrates. And I do find reason to
doubt that.
To believe that he does
yes.
think that the higher thing is the living word that gets circulated. But there is a way of writing that can keep the advantages of living, keep many of the advantages of living discourse, and inspire a much higher, a much broader swath of people.
So the intuition is he's serious when he says that the best thing to do is implanting something in the living soul. However, 2 qualifications. Number 1 is that sometimes that activity requires material basis to be done. And that in this case, it would be having these ideas survive through books. But that's not in tension with the idea that the most important thing is actually to do perhaps what we're doing today and try to live out and tease out these ideas for our lives now. And the second idea is that there's better ways and worse ways to write even books, right? That's the intuition, right?
Exactly right.
Right. So he's not being ironic when he says this. And the thing I find most distasteful about Socrates as a person, honestly, is sometimes his irony. Like, oh, by Zeus, I know nothing. You know everything. Like, even clearly when he's humiliated his opponent. I mean, as a slight tangent, what do you make of the Socratic irony? Is it a pedagogical device? I just find it very annoying.
Socrates wants to provoke. It's very tough to get people
to
realize their own inadequacies, and it's a dangerous sort of situation. So sometimes the irony is a diplomatic way of doing that, but he doesn't shy away from the danger that puts him in, and it ended up destroying him.
I see. Let me give you a quote, and we can return back to the philosophical life. Plato equates the practice of philosophy with the right way to live. The search for the good life can be said to be partly constitutive of the good life itself.
Yes.
That seems paradoxical, because if I'm searching for the good life, right, philosophia, the love of wisdom, surely that means I don't have it yet. But why is, so I can understand why philosophy is instrumental to living a good life later on, but why is philosophy itself constitutive of the good life?
Yes. Robert Nozick at one point writes, he's doing candidates for what the good life is. The good life is the life spent looking for the good life.
Right.
Thanks, but no thanks. Right. It's his response to that. And it's a very understandable response. And you're right, of course. You have to genuinely feel that there is something beyond the constant investigation in which you engage. But if you then come to think that what that is something beyond human life, then what is left is that searching will become your life willy-nilly. So it's not that the good life is a life spent looking for the good life, but that is kind of, it is a good life, and it is maybe the best way to spend our human lives looking for the good life.
The idea is that perfection is impossible, and the philosophical life, the idea of constant examination and reflection, continuously over a lifetime, is the best that we can achieve. Is it something like that, or?
Yes, you're looking for what makes life meaningful, and you can explain to someone why a philosophic life is more full of meaning than a life calculating the odds on the stock market and so on. You can try to do that. So it's not like you can't say anything.
Right.
Praise it.
But this imperfectibility, I think, is a key thing. Because think about the Buddhists. They wouldn't say, the path of cessation to suffering is the best life. No, the cessation of suffering is the best life. Because the Buddhists believe in perfectibility within this world, it's the end state that is the good life. But because there is no perfectibility for the Platonic philosopher, for the reasons we mentioned, that he's embodied in a world that is ultimately unworthy of the rational part of his soul, it's the journey itself that is the good life. Is that a good way to understand?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that a Buddhist thing? It's the journey, not the destination.
Right.
The journey itself is the.
Right.
Someone gave me a poster with that on it. It's a common feeling.
Right. But there's a danger, I think, of the philosophical life that mirrors the danger here of the life of what sex is to the philosophical lover. So I quote you your book again. The danger for people who experience the pleasure of intellectual talk is to view the continuation of their subtle talk exclusively as a prospect of further pleasure, albeit pleasure of the noblest rank.
Oh, right, yeah.
One way that the philosophical life goes wrong is that it degenerates into a form of disguised gluttony, of disguised lust, but a lust of the mind, right?
That's what Phaedrus represents in the...
Tell us a bit more about that.
Because he's kind of an impresario, I think.
A dilettante.
Yeah, dilettante. He loves to get people... He loves to get people talking, like he's running a salon, and I love to get these smart people talking, together. And, I don't know how much there is to say about that. It's obviously a corruption of what a philosophic life should really...
because he's attracted to everything around the philosophical life and not actually getting the wisdom or embodying the truth, right?
Yes, he has this image of himself as dedicated to the life of the mind, but it's vainglory.
I see. Here appears to be the solution. So another quote from your book. There are goods which, although external to the philosophic life, nevertheless belong to it more than just accidentally. Goods such as intellectual friendship and the thrill of discovery. It is just by taking a cosmic view of, say, friendship, seeing it as an ultimately contingent function of the paraphernalia in the playground in which their philosophic impulse has been left to roam, that philosophers can keep it from becoming an end in itself and so losing its benefits, and yet can enjoy those benefits as especially proper to the philosophic character. Just because, again, their impulse is to take the cosmic view of them. What is this cosmic view that allows friendship to be, on one hand, a good in itself, but not this end that takes us astray, for us to enjoy its pleasures, but not to take over the philosophical life? What is this cosmic view?
I don't have any better answer for that than just to equate it with offering up your life to God. The only way to give God an offering worthy of God, the only tools you're given are things like the friendships you make, the good that you can do in the world, the good that you can do by trying to continue your philosophic search. You have these various things that you can make the best of, while thinking that I'm only doing this, and I'm only doing this because I can offer them up to God. And if I didn't think that there was a God there who would accept my offering, these friendships and the like would have much less value for me.
I see.
That's taking a cosmic view.
And there, the relationship between God and friendship is almost like between sex and the form of beauty in the lovers. Whereas that it's only under the light of this higher thing that this lesser, potentially dangerous thing can be made kosher, safe, but still a good, not overshadowed.
Yes, and if it turns out that the best way to offer sex up to God is not to indulge it,
right,
then that's what I will do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Professor, for another fascinating interview.
Again, thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to my lectures. Now, if you like this interview, I actually filmed another with Professor Ferrari on Plato's Republic, which I think you'll find fascinating as well. You can find links to that interview and everything we covered today in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.